The Russian army did not lose this winter on a battlefield. It lost it in the snow, in the mud, in frozen trenches, inside vehicles that wouldn't start, inside radio sets that had gone silent, while Ukrainian paratroopers were already moving. What you're about to witness is not a story about territory. 8 settlements liberated in a matter of days is not just a number on a map. It is the clearest signal in 4 years of this war that Russia's most feared weapon, General Winter, has turned against the very army that was supposed to own it. We're going to show you exactly how that happened, who made it happen, and why military analysts in Washington and Brussels are now saying something quietly that they have not said since the summer of Kharkiv, that the trajectory of this war has shifted permanently. But first, you need to understand what Russia was counting on, because without that, none of what follows makes sense. Moscow's winter strategy was not complicated. It was brutal, and it was simple. Throw 100,000 soldiers into a grinding offensive across a 1,200-kilometer front from Zaporizhia in the south to Kupiansk in the north. Exhaust Ukrainian defenses, drain Western patience, freeze Ukrainian energy infrastructure, and wait for Kyiv to collapse politically before the ground thawed in spring. Putin's generals had studied Napoleon. They had studied Hitler's Operation Barbarossa. They believed, genuinely believed, that the cold would be their ally, that the frozen ground would harden roads and allow Russian armor to move, that Ukrainian morale would crack under the weight of another dark, bombed-out winter. Every one of those calculations was wrong. Here's what actually happened on the ground, and pay close attention to these numbers because they tell a story that no Russian state television broadcast will ever show. In the last 90 days of winter operations, the Russian army committed 35,000 new soldiers to offensive action every single month. In those same 90 days, Russian forces gained a total of 126 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory. 126. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces, outmanned, stretched thin, fighting with Western equipment that was still arriving in batches, seized 460 square kilometers of previously occupied ground. Russia spent 3 months and roughly 100,000 casualties to lose 4 times more land than it captured. That is not a military stalemate. That is a collapse. A slow one, but a collapse nonetheless. Put yourself in the position of a Russian platoon commander on the Zaporizhia axis in February. Your unit has been in forward positions for 11 weeks. Your soldiers are wearing winter gear from the 1980s, wool coats, not modern cold weather systems. The soldiers next to you, the lucky ones, have anti-thermal suits that muffle their heat signatures from Ukrainian drones. Most do not. Your T-80 tank, the one your regiment was told would lead the breakthrough, is buried axle deep in frozen mud 400 meters behind you. The fuel convoy that was supposed to reach you 2 days ago has not come. Ukrainian drone operators destroyed it on a road junction near Vasilevka. Your radio crackles, then goes silent. You are not receiving orders. You are not able to give them. You are simply waiting in the cold, hoping the drone above you is Ukrainian and not Russian, because at least a Ukrainian drone might take you prisoner. A Russian drone these days takes no prisoners. That is not a battlefield scene from a movie. That is the documented reality of Russian frontline conditions in the winter of 2026, captured in intercepted communications, drone footage shared by Ukrainian intelligence, and the testimony of Russian soldiers who were taken prisoner in the Oleksandrivsk direction. And now, let us talk about the paratroopers. The 82nd and 95th Air Descent Brigades are not ordinary Ukrainian infantry formations. They are the sharp edge of Ukraine's reconstituted mobile strike capability, trained in part by NATO advisors using doctrines developed in Afghanistan, refined in Baltic war games, and adapted for the specific terrain of southeastern Ukraine. General Oleksandr Pavlyuk gave these 2 brigades a mission in late January that looked, on paper, nearly impossible. push Russian forces beyond the administrative borders of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast in winter without air superiority against a Russian defensive line that had been fortified for 8 months. The military world was skeptical. Ukraine's own general staff was cautious in its public statements. And then the 82nd and 95th moved, and the skeptics went quiet. The Oleksandrivsk breakthrough was not a single dramatic charge. It was a methodical, grinding, technically precise dismantling of Russian defensive positions, using a combination of artillery suppression, FPV drone strikes to isolate strongpoints, and then rapid infantry infiltration through the gaps. The 132nd Separate Reconnaissance Battalion, working alongside specialized units designated CG-132, breached the first defensive trench line before Russian commanders even understood what formation was attacking them. By the time Russian reinforcements were ordered forward, the road they needed to use had been cut by Ukrainian artillery. By the time those reinforcements found an alternative route, the Ukrainian paratroopers were already 3 kilometers deeper into Russian-held territory. 8 settlements in 9 days against a Russian force that outmanned Ukrainian assault elements by a ratio of nearly 3-to-1. But here's the detail that changes everything, and this is the part you won't hear in a brief news bulletin. The liberation of those 8 settlements was not the primary military achievement. The primary achievement was what happened to Russia's logistics spine in the region. The closure of the Alexandrivsk corridor, the main supply artery Russia needed to sustain its push toward the Dnipro River, was severed, not damaged, severed. More than 50,000 Russian soldiers in the Zaporizhzhia sector and its surrounding areas found themselves suddenly dependent on secondary routes, longer routes, routes that are visible to Ukrainian drone operators and within range of Ukrainian HIMARS and M777 artillery systems. Every truck that now moves Russian ammunition, fuel, or food in that sector moves under Ukrainian eyes. Every convoy is a target. That is not a tactical setback for Russia. That is a logistical nightmare that compounds every day the line stays closed. And in Donetsk Oblast, the picture is equally damaging for Moscow. The Phoenix unit of the Ukrainian State Border Guard Service destroyed 2 Russian T-72 tanks in a single engagement, not with anti-tank missiles fired from covered positions, but with first-person view attack drones piloted by operators who had trained for fewer than 6 months. Think about what that means strategically. Russia's entire armored doctrine, the doctrine that allowed Soviet tank formations to overrun Hungary in 1956, Czechoslovakia in 1968, and that Putin believed would overrun Ukraine in 72 hours in February 2022, is built on one foundational assumption: that armor is mobile, that armor is dominant, and that infantry without anti-armor systems cannot stop it. In the winter of 2026, Ukrainian drone operators are destroying that assumption one tank at a time. Every T-72 that burns in a Donetsk field is not just a $2 million piece of hardware destroyed. It's a data point that tells every military planner on Earth the doctrine is obsolete. The Baba Yaga drone operators of Lasser's group made that point with brutal clarity in footage released on February 28th. A Russian Grad multiple rocket launcher, the weapon system that has killed more Ukrainian civilians than any other single platform in this war, attempted to flee down a forest road in the Donetsk sector after its position was identified. The Baba Yaga, a large hexacopter carrying munitions that no military on Earth had conceptualized as a frontline weapon 5 years ago, tracked it, hit it, watched it stop, and then dropped munitions on it until the Grad's own rockets cooked off and the vehicle ceased to exist. The entire engagement lasted less than 4 minutes. It was watched in real time by Ukrainian intelligence officers in a command point 40 kilometers away. Taras Chumut, president of the Come Back Alive Foundation and a member of Ukraine's Defense Management Agency Supervisory Board, said something on March 1st that deserves to be repeated slowly and heard carefully. He said, For the first time in many months, perhaps even years, Ukraine has begun to liberate more territory than it has lost. Read that again. Not holding the line, not slowing advances, liberating more than it has lost. That is a threshold. And once a war crosses a threshold like that, history shows it rarely crosses back. Russia knows this. That's why the Kremlin has done something that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. In the 28th Motorized Rifle Brigade, holding a section of line near what Ukrainians call the Kherson direction, the Russian command has begun arming medical personnel. Doctors, nurses, people who trained to save lives are now being handed hunting rifles and told to hold trenches, not because Moscow ran out of ideas, because Moscow ran out of soldiers willing to go to those trenches voluntarily. The manpower crisis in the Russian army has not just crossed